Hey everyone. Hey Jiber, how are you?
Hi Lisa, nice to talk to you.
Yes, nice to talk to you as well. Welcome to the Cloud Lunch and Learn channel. Super happy to have you here. We will give it another couple of minutes. My timing didn't go very well with the videos, but there are new fancy videos. So we'll try again next week to have those in time. But how are you? How has your week gone? Have you had a nice week?
Yeah, so far all good here. I'm transmitting from Buenos Aires, Argentina. So it's really nice to be here in this initiative, Launch and Learn, right? So definitely something really, really good. So.
And what time is it for you just now?
Down here at 2 p.m. here in Buenos Aires.
Yeah. So maybe like a late lunchtime for you. It's 6
coffee
p.m.
time.
Coffee time, yes, indeed. I'm here with my ear, ready to have a snack. So I will be snacking and learning. But yeah, looking forward to that. So everyone, by now you know the drill, hopefully. Please scan the QR code that you see in front of you. Remember, this gets you access to free Microsoft Learn materials, which everyone loves. And it also helps to show Microsoft, our sponsors, who's joining our sessions, and it just feeds back to them how our Cloud Lunch and Learn sessions are going. So we really, really appreciate it if you register to these sessions. And what I will do is I will pop the link in the comments so that if you don't want to scan and use your QR code, you can just click from here. So bear with me and I'll add that to the chat. Hey, Andrew. Andrew, I think you've been with us most weeks over the last few weeks. So it's good to see you here again and appreciate you joining. That's awesome.
Yeah, we're going to be here together a few more weeks ahead.
Yes, this is a 3-part series that we've got on Azure Data Platform, Azure SQL. So really looking forward to this. I'm just going to give it, because it's just 6 o'clock, so I'm just going to give it another minute or two before I let you basically take over and teach us all about this. So I was going to ask you to tell us a little bit about yourself, but you'll probably do that in your presentation.
Yeah.
So what I will ask you is, where you are just now, are you in any form of lockdown just now?
Well, down here is going back and forth. The cases are rising like crazy. So since Friday, we have like a half lockdown, starting at 6 p.m. till 6 a.m. School just closed this past Monday. So my kids are down here just trying to catch up with the virtual classes and all those kind of things. So normal things that everyone is facing these days in this weird situation.
Yes, very true. In Scotland, we went into a lockdown on December 26th, and we've been in a lockdown since then. But next week things begin to open up, and actually this week we are now allowed to travel outside of our county area. So I can now leave Dundee.
Okay, good.
And I can now travel Scotland. So that's nice. And then, some things will start to open up again next week. And I think most children are now back at school and have been for a few weeks. So fingers crossed that we'll start to open up again, because it's been a long lockdown since December. But yeah, we've all got to make our way through it, I suppose. Okay, everyone. So before I hand over, I just want to remind everyone that we have our Cloud Lunch and Learn Marathon event coming up on the 13th of May. It's our first ever event, and we're super excited. It's a truly global event. We've got 170 plus sessions with 150 speakers. We've got multiple languages. We've got a cloud skills challenge. So you'll have the opportunity to win Microsoft certification vouchers, which I know are always super handy to people. So if you have not registered already, please do, because we are tying the amount of registrations that we get to a charity that we're raising money for. And you can read a bit more about that on the website. I'll pop the link to register to the event in the comments in a moment. But with that, I will hand it over to you.
All right. Thank you, Lisa. So let me start with presentation. Yeah, here we go. All right. Thank you, Lisa. And, thank you, everyone, for attending to this session. And the idea here is basically to have a quick introduction to what Azure Data Platform is, right? Just trying to cover all the different components, or at least, you know, some of the most important ones, so we can just catch up with what it is and get to know all the different alternatives that we may have, right, in order for us to start our next project in Azure, right? So that's the main idea. So a little bit about myself. My name is Javier Villegas. I'm based in Buenos Aires, Argentina. I'm IT Director of Data and BI at Mediterranean Shipping Company. I've been working there for 15 years. I'm involved with SQL Server and Azure SQL since probably more than 20 years. My specialty is SQL Server administration, performance tuning, high availability. I am Microsoft MVP in the data platform category since 2016, and I am also Microsoft certified trainer since last year. I define myself also as a technical speaker. I try to present this type of sessions everywhere I get invited. In the past in person, now virtually, and looking forward to meet again all together to talk about technology and hang up. At the left side of the screen, you will see all my contact information: email, LinkedIn, Twitter, and my blog. In case you want to follow up on any question related to this presentation, or if you just want to networking, I love to stay connected, especially these times. And as you said, Lisa, we're gonna see each other the next few weeks, trying to cover different topics related to data, right? So let's see a little bit about the agenda, basically, which are the topics that we will try to cover during the presentation, right? You know that Microsoft has done this reorganization many years ago by now, because, you know, before they were kind of different isolated products, and then with the Azure era, let's say, different technologies and services. So, and you know, instead of being SQL Server, analysis services, and all like separate thing, it put everything under the same umbrella called data platform, right? And now in Azure, what we will try to do is describe some of these services and options that we have. We're going to cover Azure SQL, right? Briefly, we're going to go deeper in, I believe, next week. We're also going to cover Azure Analysis Services, Databricks. We're going to check, and we're going to also go through Azure Cosmos DB and many of the other relational databases that are offered in Azure. We know that Microsoft is not only hosting, let's say, their own product like SQL Server, they are also hosting others open source engines, right? We're also going to cover the portal briefly, and we're going to mention one of the most recent tools in order to handle some of these services, which is Azure Data Studio. All right, so let's start. Here is the very big initial picture of most, not all of them, because likely they keep evolving and Microsoft keep adding these services quite often. Most of the services available in Azure, right? And let's try to define some sort of categories, right? So for what we can do with this group of services, and then at some point let's try to decide which is going to be the best option for any specific situation that we may have or we may face, again, in order to use them in our next project in Azure. So first of all, we need to ingest the data, right? Like load the data into our data platform solution. Let's call it solution, right? And for that, Microsoft provides us a service which is called Azure Data Factory. Right? We're going to go deeper into this later, right? But let's just mention Azure Data Factory. What it is basically a service that allows you to move and transform data, right, that you may have at any type, maybe on premises, maybe on a data lake, text files, even in another cloud provider, right, in order to transform it, right, and load it into our solution, right? Similar thing, but a little bit more basic with Azure Import-Export service, right? But let's say that Azure Data Factory is really the service which is in charge to move data, particularly into the solution, right? Then we have let's say databases, right? And here I'm just mentioning two of them. One is Azure SQL Database, right, as the relational engine, and then Azure Cosmos DB, which is the NoSQL solution that Microsoft offer in the cloud, right? This category, just let's call it database engines, we're gonna go through deeper later on, but just to present into the different categories, right? Then there is another solution, which is the Azure SQL Data Warehouse, right? Which basically, this is the previous name of the solution. Now, this has been evolved a lot, actually, into one of the most, let's say, important and used services that Microsoft have available today, which is Azure Synapse Analytics, which allow you to, Azure Synapse Analytics, one of the component was the data warehouse, right? So now it has evolved. Maybe I may have to update it also here. We're going to cover Azure Synapse Analytics as well. Then, in order to store the data, Microsoft offers us two main components. One is Azure Blob Storage, in order for us to store any kind of file, right, as a blob option, as well as Azure Data Lake Store, right? So they present us these particular services in where we can, let's say, I like to say, park our data, right, and store, right, all the data that we need to either import, process, or present to an extra or an additional layer on our service, right? Then Related to big data, Microsoft offered one of the services that was in the market for many years now, which is HD Insight. And also, we're going to have here one product called Azure Databricks, right? If you go deeper into this slide, you will see that HD Insight and Azure Databricks are also present in other categories that we're going to cover in a few seconds, right? But something that I'd like to emphasize here is that Azure Databricks is actually Databricks, which is coming from Spark, right? It's the managed Spark solution, which is initially an open source solution, which has initially absolutely nothing to do with Microsoft, but Microsoft put it here in their ecosystem, right, as Azure Databricks. Then we will try to cover which are the main difference between Azure Databricks and the Databricks solution offered by Spark. We also have Azure IoT, Event Hub, and Kafka, right? This is the category that allow us to manage and handle stream data, IoT data, right? So, you know, this day there are a bunch of devices generating, creating data with the format of an event, right? So not, let's say, an structure or a structure or unstructured, let's say, data, but also as events, right? So these IoT devices generate this kind of events in massively, right? Well, this service allows us to collect, store, and process, right? This kind of events, again, in the Azure solution. In order to handle these events and process them accordingly, Microsoft also provides this service called Stream Analytics, right? Additionally to Stream Analytics, we can also process the stream data with, again, HD Insight and Databricks, right? Focusing on the main categories and just the presentation of each of the services, not into the deep, let's say, description, because as I said, we're going to be covering then in a few minutes. At the top right side of the screen, we will also see Azure Analysis Services and Power BI, right? These are two powerful services that allow us to do, let's say, present the data to the users, or, you know, present the data to move it to the next step of the data project. With Azure Analysis Services, we can deploy our tabular models, right, in an Azure service, and being able to process our cubes. And then with Power BI, we can create and design a powerful dashboard to present the data that we process within those tabular models. In terms of machine learning, right? Microsoft give us Azure machine learning and machine learning server with R and Python. And again, we see Databricks here. So that means with these three services, we can do machine learning within Azure. Additionally, we have bot services and cognitive services, right? In where we can use both of these services to enrich the data that we collect and store from Azure Data Factory, from the data lake, and also coming from IoT hubs, right? So these two services will help us on this, enrich the data that we are collecting and processes. Then something really important is Azure Search and Data Catalog, which will allow us to let's say, perform certain data discovery, right, within our project and solution, right, and help us to do a little bit more of governance of this data that we are trying to analyze here, right? And then finally, the bottom layer, which are not data related services in Azure, but definitely services that are extremely tied with data. And most of them are related to the infrastructure part of Azure. For example, Express Route, to have connectivity between our on-premise network in our company, right, with Azure. Azure Active Directory for all that is related to authorization and authentication. Azure Functions, the Azure Security Groups, right, and Visual Studio. So this is the foundation for the infrastructure part of Azure, which allow us to host our project at the top. So putting together all these icons and components within the Azure Data Platform, we can, let's say, start working on different architectures, right? This is, of course, like a sample architecture, just trying to combine. Most of them is more like a model, right? But just presenting this architecture and few others that we're going to be covering, right, will give you the idea of which kind of projects we can consider in Azure Data Platform when we need to design and project one of them. So let's start covering this. At the left side of the screen, right, we have all the various type of data that we can ingest into our architecture, right? We have at the top the stream data, again, coming from IoT devices, sensors. Today, again, even a refrigerator sends IoT data, and we can, load it into our project. Then we have structured data, semi-structured data, and I said non-structured, semi-structured, and relational database, like relational data, like for example, tables in SQL Server. Semi-structured could be any kind of logs or JSON or even XML. And non-structured could be any kind of data like image, video, audio, or free text, right? So those are the different type of data that we can ingest into our project. How do we do that? Well, then the load and ingest part, we mentioned this before, we have the Event Hub to process the stream data and Data Factory to do the import and load of any kind of data that we have into our next step, right? So when we move to the next step, which in fact here is store, right? We have Azure Data Lake, in where we can, again, park our data there to then store and move forward with Azure Synapse Analytics, and then ingest the output of these services into the part that we call processing, right? To process the upper part of the architecture, which again is coming from streaming data, right? We have stream analytics. And if we need to process semi-structured, non-structured, or relational data, we can do it with Azure Databricks, right? Additionally, and as we mentioned earlier, with cognitive services and machine learning, we can enrich all this data in order to add add value, right, to the data that we collect in our project, right? And just going to the final part of our sample or model architecture, we can have Azure Cosmos DB to store the output. We can also, it's not here, but we can also use Azure Analysis Services to, again, deploy our models, and then present to the final user or to another application using Power BI, right? So, few of the components that we mentioned here: Azure Data Factory, Data Lake, Synapse Analytics, Databricks, Cosmos DB, Cognitive Services, Event Hub, and Power BI. So, let's try to come up with certain, let's say, scenarios, right? We can just consider any kind of relational project, right? So again, what I just mentioned is the big picture, right? We can go and have, for example, a normal project, like, let me move forward, like a traditional model that we may have for SQL Server or any other relational engine, like, the transactional part, the warehouse, the analysis part, and everything covered by the extraction, transform, and load, right? And the reporting part. Then we can also have, the big data solution, right? Again, handling by stream data, handling by big data, using different techniques like stream analytics, AD Insight, and Cosmos. Finally, enrich the data once again with cognitive services and reports. So let's go a little bit deeper into the components, right? Azure SQL, again, we're going to cover it in deep in the next few weeks. But what Azure's offer us in this area of Azure SQL, that we're going to put a bunch of things into Azure SQL. One of them is virtual machines running the same SQL Server version that we have in our companies on-premise, in our physical servers, right? There is also another component called Azure SQL Database, which is more targeted to modern application, right? Let's leave it like this. Again, we're going to go deeper. And then we have managed instance. Managed instance is the platform as a service offering that SQL Server has. So we don't have to handle and work with the, let's say, infrastructure of our SQL solution at all, because it's part of the service. What do I mean with that? If you have a virtual machine running SQL Server, you probably have to, not probably, you have to take care of your underlying virtual machine in terms of the operating system, apply the patches not only to SQL, but also to Windows, take care of the backup, set up the whole availability groups, work with the Active Directory in order to have the whole authentication thing. So you have to handle the whole infrastructure behind SQL Server, right? This is what Microsoft called infrastructure as a service, a virtual machine running your product, in this case, SQL Server. And you have a bunch of combinations of operating systems and SQL Server's versions and edition, right? You know that since SQL Server 2016, SQL Server runs not only in Windows platform, but also in Linux platform, in the major distribution like SUSE, Red Hat, and Ubuntu, right? So you can choose any kind of combination of operating systems, Windows, Linux, SQL Server version, and edition, right, with this. But again, you have to take care of setting up everything that I mentioned before. The other two options, managed instance and Azure SQL databases, right, is what Microsoft called the platform as a service offering, right, which bring you an SQL Server endpoint. So the only thing you have to do is just connect to them, deploy your databases, and focus on that. You don't have to worry about patching, taking the backups, availability, anything, right? Because this is the service that is being offered to you. Each of them, right, has its own characteristics because they can be used for certain things, right? So today, SQL Server runs kind of everywhere, right? We should set Linux, we should set virtual machines. We also mentioned platform as a services, right? But it's also runs on little devices, right? Small devices like an ARM architecture, right? So in a sensor, or for example, in a Raspberry Pi like this, you can have Azure SQL Edge edition, right? So of course you won't be running your mission critical decision making application in one of these devices, but definitely for certain scenarios, right, at edge, right, like a sensor or any kind of solution, you can have these devices that will allow you to do certain processing and store your relational database, right? So how do we see all this? Through the Azure Portal, right? When we log into the Azure Portal, we access to what is Azure SQL, and from there we have the three offerings that I just mentioned: Azure SQL Database, Managed Instance, and Virtual Machine, right? So as we said, VMs, infrastructure as a service, Azure SQL Database, platform as a service, and managed instance, right? But what if my project or the project that I have to work with right now requires a relational engine, right? But for certain reason, it's not SQL Server, right? Well, guess what? As a platform as a service offering, Microsoft allow you to have PostgreSQL, right? MariaDB, and MySQL, right? So not only SQL Server, but also three other relational engines that are open source, right? And you can have them again as a platform as a service. Remember, don't have to worry about backups, patching, high availability, etc. Right? So this is also part of the data platform architecture, right? Not only SQL, but also other major relational engines, which is extremely good for you to have multiple options for your project. Mm. So let's switch gears a little bit and let's talk about what is Azure Data Factory, right? With Azure Data Factory, right? If you are coming from the SQL Server family, you most probably know a product called Microsoft SQL Server Integration Services, right? Which was the product that allow you to work on different integration services packages to do this load and transformation processes for example, warehouses. Mm. Okay, Azure Data Factory is, first of all, a service, not a software that you have to install, right? Which allow you to accomplish the same, right? But as a superset of integration services, because you can, as I said, integrate data from multiple data sources, including other cloud providers, right? Uh, Simple CSV files. You can get data from Azure Blob Storage, and also you can go to your environment, your company, right, and get access to your own databases and data sources. That could be SQL Server, another relational engine, analysis services, anything that you would like to access on-prem, right? So the source and also the destination cannot be only a cloud offering, but also a hybrid solution between on-prem and cloud. Really, really powerful. In order to have access from Azure Data Factory to your data on-premise, there is a component that has to be installed that performs some sort of a bridge or a gateway between the cloud and your on-premise environment, right? Additionally, you can orchestrate to run SSIS processes, integration services packages from Azure Data Factory, which allow you to reuse some of these designs that you already have in place. The destination for this could be, again, any source, right? From a simple CSV file up to, for example, a managed instance, as it is here, or any other relational engine that you may see, right? We'll see that there are over 100 possible data sources available in Azure Data Factory. Then we will switch to Azure Databricks, right? So as we mentioned at the beginning, Azure Databricks is the Apache Spark-based platform optimized for Microsoft Azure Cloud. What is this, right? Databricks is a service that is available in the market. You can go there and use it, but this one is really tuned and adapted to the Microsoft platform. So you can also integrate it with Active Directory authentication. You can integrate it with another Azure component, right? And you can use the security of the Azure infrastructure, right? So it's quite well, let's say, merged with the Azure technology, right? And as you saw in the first diagram, the model architecture, we may see it in multiple options or multiple categories, I will say, right? The interesting thing of Azure Databricks is that it is really a collaborative environment, a collaborative workspace in where you can be a data engineering, a data scientist, or a business analyst and use the platform in many aspects. Again, you can ingest any kind of data from streaming to relational, semi-structured, non-structured into Databricks, right? You can have different machine learning runtimes which help you to work with the data that you have and use the API that you prefer in order to handle all this. We're going to cover this in few minutes. Definitely, this is part of the Apache Spark ecosystem, so and it's quite integrated with the whole Azure solution, right? So this is a sample architecture that we can have with Databricks only, right? It's similar to the one that we saw at the beginning with streaming and any kind of data with storage, but in this case, we have Azure Databricks as a center of the solution, in when at the end we can serve any any other component from the solution. As I was saying earlier, you can use the API that you prefer, or you depending on the needs, right? So see at the bottom, you can use R, right, in order to do machine learning, or Python, Scala, or Java, and also you can use SQL, right? You can treat your data within Databricks as let's say SQL. Right? And you have also, within the ecosystem, you can, do graph. You can, again, have your own rendering for different other options, right? So Databricks, if you are not familiar with, right, I will say that it's one of the most powerful solutions within Azure because you can use it for many options, right? Um, Moving forward, we go to Azure Analysis Services. Again, as managed instance, Azure Managed Instance is the PaaS offering of SQL Server. Azure Analysis Services is the PaaS offering of analysis services. That component that we get with the SQL Server installation media, right? When you go and install SQL Server, you have the option to include analysis services. But again, if you do it that way, you have to handle the whole high availability, disaster recovery, patching, all the things that we just said. In this case, you have the Azure Analysis Services endpoint. So you just connect with your client, right? It could be Visual Studio to do the development and deployment of your tabular models, or Power BI, right? So you can use Azure Analysis Services, same as you've been using analysis services on-prem. With the, again, since it is integrated, fully integrated with Azure, you can use any of the cloud data sources. You can use the warehouse from Azure Data Warehouse that now is Synapse Analytics, and then deeply integrated with Power BI. Additionally to all this, again, you can go and access your on-premise data, right? So remember, as we mentioned, with Data Factory, right? You can have access from your cloud solution to your on-premise data. In this case, there is a component called on-premise data gateway, which allow you to do this interaction between Azure Analysis Services or Power BI to use your on-prem sources, right? This is the component that Microsoft called on-premise data gateway. This is a piece of software that you have to install on a virtual machine, on a server in your local network, which allow you to connect not only Azure Analysis Services, but Power BI, Power Apps, Power Automate, and Logix app, right? So this way, from any of these services, you can have access to the data that you host on-prem, right? Uh, Here is some of the examples that the type of data that you can access from these cloud services that we just mentioned, right? And which kind of services you can use underneath. One of the examples that I like to mention here that I use multiple times is from National Analysis Services solution, right? Having access to IBM DB2 database hosting and AS400, right? So imagine all those kind of combination that you can do with there. You have your AS400 technology that is a little bit old, but definitely still valid and heavily used in some cases, right? But you can have access to that data that you have on this big AS400 from any of the services hosted in Azure, like, as we said, Logix app, analysis services, Power BI. Really, really powerful. Then we have Azure Cosmos DB, which is the NoSQL solution from Microsoft, which basically allow you to have a very distributed global environment, really scalable, right? And multi-model in one service. With this, you can deploy your NoSQL solution in multiple Azure regions, right? With that, you can accomplish a really, really low latency for your data, right? This is important because you can host any kind of models you see here in the slide. You can have graph, document, relational, or key values. So definitely one of the most, let's say, the services really used for this NoSQL solution, right? Since it is globally distributed, right, and also really important, it's multi-master, so you can write at any of these entries distributed around the world, right? Is one of the backend services that are really, really good ones. For example, the Azure Portal as a backend, it uses Cosmos DB to handle the backend of the portal. Also, really interesting is that you can use several APIs in order to handle the data that you host in Cosmos DB. You can have Cassandra, Mongo, Gremlin, right? And you can also treat the data with SQL, so you can create your own table, right? So Cosmos DB, one of the services that if you would like to, let's say, store and process non-relational data or document data, or even eventually relational data, you can use it with Cosmos DB. So we also have the Azure Data Studio tool, which is basically one of the, it has certain amount of years in the market by now, but I would say it's one of the most recent additions to the family. So this is kind of the brother of SQL Server Management Studio, right? For the ones who knows Management Studio, it's an application that we, the DBA, use for many years in order to connect, manage, and administer SQL Server, and also do certain development, right? It's an application that have several years in the market, but it's Windows only, right? With Azure Data Studio, that first of all is a multi-platform client, right? So you can run it from Windows, Linux, or Mac, right? And you can connect to any of the Azure SQL component that we mentioned before. So SQL Server, Managed Instance, and Azure SQL Database, right? But also you can connect to Postgres, right? So not only SQL solution, but also non-Microsoft offering. As part of the the offering, you can expand or extend the Azure Data Studio solution with extensions, right? So there are several extensions that you can integrate into a solution in order to make your Azure Data Studio environment much more powerful. Something extremely useful and with a lot of innovation, especially again for us that are coming from the SQL Server world, is the Jupyter notebooks, right? In where you can create a single document in Azure Data Studio, in where you can integrate different programming languages like Transact SQL, but also PowerShell, Java, R, Python within a single document, right? And then you can, save and share this document with your colleagues, right? So for the ones who need to, get access to some of the services that we mentioned, take a look of Azure Data Studio, especially the Jupyter Notebook is an extremely powerful solution. If you are a data engineering or a data analyst, right, with this Jupyter Notebooks and the possibility of integrate R, Python, or Scala within this document, you can accomplish a bunch of great things with it. We also have the Azure Portal, which is the beginning of everything, right? So it's one of the most important entry point for you as an architect to start creating and developing this project. It's not the only one. You can also use the different CLI option from command line in order to deploy one service or multiple services this way. But definitely the Azure Portal is the graphical user interface for us to get access. And let's see it in action just for a bit and see which are the things that we can accomplish with it. So let me go to my portal here. I am connected to my portal, right? And here are some of the resources that I have. I will go briefly to the one that is called Azure SQL, and you will see that within Azure SQL, in this case, I have two type of resources already created. One is a SQL virtual machine, again, a virtual machine running Windows Server and SQL Server, and then managed instance, right? If we go to Azure Databricks, here, in this case, I don't have one created, but from here, we can start the whole process to create and deploy one of them. And with that, we can do the same for all the resources that we just mentioned earlier. Azure Data Factory. Again, from here, you create your data factory and you have the whole, let's say, development environment to start working on the process that you need to do the data loading. Everything from the portal. You don't need to get out of this to create these data movement projects. Let's go back for a minute to Azure SQL, right? And let's see how we can do to create one of the services. So let's go briefly to create new, right? So we go to new. Then we have this screen that we saw during the presentation in where, again, you can choose any of the components, right? Database, managed instance, or virtual machine. So let's go quickly to virtual machine, right? See here all the combination of SQL Server versions and editions and operating system, right? We can have from Windows Server 2019 running SQL Server 2019, right? Also with Red Hat, Ubuntu, and SUSE. Then SQL Server 2017. And if we go to the bottom, we can even see SQL Server 2008 R2 with Windows Server 2008 R2. These are products that are not, let's say, are not supported anymore by Microsoft. But eventually, you can have your virtual machine here. And if it is hosted in Azure, Microsoft will give you this additional support, right? What is quite interesting on this is that if we go just to create, we just choose randomly SQL Server virtual machines, you have this wizard which allow you to go through all this process to create, in this case, again, a virtual machine running SQL Server. But if you go to Data Factory or Databricks or Managed Instance or, I don't know, MySQL, right? You will see that the experience within the portal is quite similar, right? So you have to, of course, each of the services that we just mentioned, they have their unique settings and this kind of thing. But let's say the common framework to create these services is quite similar. So let's try to go quickly through one of these. First of all, we have to choose the subscription, right? So this is how Microsoft recognizes and how they bill us. Then we have to put this into a resource group. A resource group is a logical grouping within Azure in where you can deploy different services, right? So it's a logical grouping. They call it resource group. I have a few of them. I will use one that is already exist. You have to specify a machine name, in this case, a virtual machine name. So let's call it VM Learn and Launch and Learn, right? It's going to check if it is available or not. Then you have to specify the Azure region, right? And the list is quite extensive here. This is, you know, that Microsoft have different Azure regions or data center distributed around the world, right? So you can choose the one in where you want to deploy the services that we are working with right now. Ideally, those services or that region should be the one in where you have less latency from the location that you are in right now, right? For example, I would choose East US, right? Then we can choose again the image that we would like to use here, right? And then the size. Right? The size is also something that is quite important as well, because from here we have multiple, let's say, virtual machine families in where you can choose the amount of virtual processing, memory, disk, etc., etc. But one of the most important, let's say, characteristic from Azure is that it's really scalable, right? You can scale really, really easy. Not only a virtual machine, but also a service, right? Let's say that you need to increase the horsepower of your solution, right? From the Azure portal, you can assign more memory, more CPU. If it is an Azure SQL managed instance, you can upgrade to a different tier, assign more vCores, put faster storage, and a bunch of other things that you have available. So the whole scaling process in Azure is one of the unique characteristics, which is extremely flexible and easy to use. If you are doing your data platform project in an on-premise environment, well, guess what? If your server is running out of resources, you're going to need some time in order to, let's say, buy the additional memory, the CPU, go to the, let's say you have to go to the manufacturer, get the quote, sign up the contract, and then, you know, after hopefully in a couple of weeks, you will have all these resources. Within Azure, the whole scale is just a few clicks, right? So you can scale up anytime you want, and also scale down. If there are certain period of times in where you don't need to use all this available horsepower, you can scale down. And there are some services that gives you the possibility of using what they call serverless, right? That when they are not in use, they get into some PaaS mode in where the compute module, let's say, get deallocated, and you only pay for the storage and not for the compute. And when there is a new request to connect to this particular service, the service will resume automatically. So this way, you can have a cost-effective solution for your deployment, right? So this is a brief introduction. Let me go back to the presentation. We are just closing this up. And with that, I just finished this presentation. Again, Azure Data Platform is a wide umbrella with a bunch of services for different needs, right? So the idea with this presentation was just give you a sneak peek of each of them, or at least the most important one for you to know them and consider them for your next project. So, and that's the end of the presentation.
Amazing, Javier. That was awesome. I think that was probably the most comprehensive overview of the Azure Data Platform I've seen. I was not aware, the way you explained, I wasn't aware of all of the services and also how they played together. And the way that you laid that out with use cases, honestly, brilliant. That was a really great session.
Thank you.
We only had one question, and that was, I'm just going to put it up on the screen because I want to make sure that I read it out correctly. So, is there any service in Azure to detect, is that P2 information in Azure Blob?
I'm not extremely familiar, but I believe that there is something. There is, yeah. Let me go back to this. If you can get in touch with me in any of my social networks, I will get the answer directly from Microsoft and send you the link to the documentation.
That's awesome. So Pradeep, if you're still with us and want to know the answer to this question, Javier will find it for you. So just drop him a message and ask, and that'd be awesome if you could get the answer. So that's it for this week. What will we be back with next week, Javier?
So next week, I believe the one we have is an introduction to Azure SQL, right? So which is the one that I let's say I use most of the time, right? I'm coming from the DBA area, so we're gonna go deeper with all the offerings that we have within the Azure SQL family, right? And how to use each of these offering, and also we will see which are the use case of each of them, as well as how to, let's say, start a migration process from your on-premise SQL solution into Azure, right? So those are the things that we will be covering the next week. And I believe that the other week we're going to talk about specifically managed instance, which is the offering as a PaaS offering of SQL Server. Again, a unique solution.
Awesome, excellent. So Andrew said that was a great session. So that's awesome. Thanks, Andrew. And yep, everyone, please do remember, if you are with us live just now or you watch this shortly afterwards, please scan the QR code that you see on the screen and register for free Microsoft learning materials related to this session. But also it's great feedback for the Cloud Lunch and Learn team, because Microsoft are really great and sponsor us. So it provides good feedback to them. I've popped the link for the next event in the chat. So click on that, get yourself registered, set a reminder, and we'll be back again same time next week.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Bye.
See you later. Bye-bye.
Bye.